Well, good evening. I'm Henry Neufeld of Energion Publications, and today I'm talking with Dr. Bruce Epperly. Bruce is an author of just a whole lot of books. He's also both theologian, has been an academic professor, and is also a pastor. The book we're going to be talking about today is very timely. It's called Process, Theology and Politics, and we'll look a little bit, we're certainly going to connect this some to the contemporary situation. So welcome, Bruce.
Well, it's good to be here tonight, and it's good to be here and to hopefully say a helpful word in the challenging time in which we live. You know, it's a little bit like Harry Emerson Fosdick's hymn, save us from weak resignation to the evils we deplore, and how can we live politically and gracefully in these challenging times?
Okay, these are, and it's this book is unusually timely, probably even more timely than we planned when we originally scheduled it. And so we get this conversation at this kind of a time. And I would just want to let everybody know the book is available. It's both available as an ebook and in print. You'll see the URL on the bottom for our Energion Direct retail store. As a matter of fact, I put it under my picture here as well as Bruce's. And on there, you can also find links to other retailers for both the ebook and the print edition. So with that done, let me get into my questions. And I want to start with a kind of key issue, since we're talking process theology and politics, not just theology in general. What most drives your political views as a theologian?
Well, that's a key issue right now. And I believe once upon a time, it might have been Pulitzer, it might have been Niebuhr, might have been Tillich, who said that we should have the Bible in one hand and the New York Times in the other. Today, we might add your cable news as well, and the news that comes on your news feed. What drives me really is the state of the world and the need for a faithful Christian response to the situation in which we find ourselves in. The planet's on fire, and I think we can't sit at the sidelines. We have to say something to help make the situation we're in healthier and better, and do it in a civil way. In my own life, I've been influenced by the prophets. The prophets of Israel, the northern and southern kingdom, have become important to me over the past couple of years. They took seriously the notion that God was concerned about the weights and measures, about people being able to pay their rent, about having food on their tables, and about the radical disparity of the wealthy and the poor. And they really have driven me in good measure. And of course, Jesus, I see as part of the prophetic tradition. And Jesus may not have had any political power. As Howard Thurman, one of my heroes, said, Jesus lived his entire life in oppression. But Jesus clearly shows us a way to expand the circle of care, expand the circle of love, to be inclusive and not exclusive, to be healing and not destroying. And so I have been inspired by the situation in which we find ourselves, not as a partisan or an ideologue, but seeing that the house is on fire, whether we talk about the fires in California, the protests, the racial injustice, the systemic injustice, the poverty, or the COVID. We're facing a perfect storm of challenges. And if churches are quiet and pastors are quiet, then they're missing a wonderful opportunity to help shape the world for the good.
Okay, let's look at a couple of things. I'm going to do some follow-up. I do want to get down to some of what you talked about in terms of communication and pastoring, especially pastoring congregations with perhaps diverse views. But let's look at a couple of things in particular. the church is a fairly segregated organization itself. I'm wondering how we speak from the church to the issues of race relations in the United States and the world right now.
That's an important question. And I think the first and most important thing for someone like me to note is to confess that I'm a person of privilege. That's a most important thing, that I cannot lecture other people and tell them how to behave. I certainly can't lecture the indigenous people and the people of colors and tell them how to behave, because I have tremendous privilege. I'm not worried about where I drive my car. I'm not worried about the constable stopping me. I'm not worried about those things. So I think the first thing I have to be concerned about is humility. Humility, and then empathy, and try to look at how other people are experiencing the world. We've just been starting a racial justice group at our church, at South Congregational Church on Cape Cod. And we are amazed at how little we know as a white community about the struggles that our neighbors face, our neighbors in the African American and other communities face. And we have to be humble. We have to listen. We have to try not to perpetuate stereotypes. We have to listen to the voices of those who struggle. Certainly these days, one of the things that I'm struggling with and trying to really be on the right side of history is to be what is called an anti-racist, as Ibram Kendi says, an anti-racist. That is somebody who's choosing not to be a racist by trying to promote equality in our social order, by not just standing by, but looking at the social structures, doing what I can to be self-aware, doing what I can to make a difference. And to me, it is one of the critical issues of our time. We need to find a way to get beyond the binary, white and black. And we need to find a way for white people not to be defensive because people of color are gaining rights. It's absolutely essential for us to know the world is changing. Our nation is changing. And we need to be, at least I need to be, somebody as a Christian who takes seriously injustice, who calls it what it is, who doesn't deny it, who questions my own whiteness, who challenges other white people, especially with the rise of white nationalism and Christian nationalism, both of which have racist components in my perspective. We need to know that we need healing. I've spent a lot of time studying Howard Thurman, even wrote a book by Howard Thurman called Prophetic Healing, Howard Thurman's vision of contemplative activism. And I'm a lot like Thurman. I'm more of a teacher, more of a pastor than a social activist. But I've realized that my own religious life, my own encounter with God, forces me to take social change seriously, forces me to take that question of justice flowing down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, and to be in solidarity with those who struggle.
Okay, well, there's a number of things in there that we could spend a lot of time talking about, and I'm going to hold those for a later time. I do want to get a little bit more specific on process theology, which we will in just a few minutes. But first, there's a wide variety of views on how Christians should be, how or if Christians should be involved in politics, and you made a fairly clear, actually say marked out terrain on the being involved in politics. Do you have any specifics for how people of faith should or should not be involved in the political sphere? Are there things that you need to watch out for as a person of faith in terms of the way in which you're involved because of faith?
Well, I think so. And I think we need to be prayerfully inclusive and prayerfully hospitable to a variety of perspectives. The one thing that we need to start with, I think, is that we don't live in a theocracy. Even though some Christians would like to live in a theocracy and would like ethical issues to be determined entirely by faith and political issues entirely by faith. We live in a pluralistic society, which means that we have to relate to a variety of viewpoints. We can't coerce people into our position, although we can certainly have a position and try to be persuasive about it. I mean, I'm thinking about the folks that have shaped me. Some of them are Christians, some of them weren't. I think of my dad, who was an evangelical Baptist pastor in a small town, probably never thought of himself as political. He was an Eisenhower Republican in the 50s when I was growing up, but he would provide places for migrant workers to stay. He would reach out to the poor in the community, and he did it in the politics of relationships. Now, as I got to be a little bit older, I was influenced by Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez, whose farm workers movement, in Dolores Huerta, whose farm workers movement was active in the Salinas Valley, where I grew up. And to see the need for people of faith to be active for the least of these, the notion that we are people for others. Now, I don't believe we should be coercive. We are a society of pluralists. I don't think we should privilege any particular church position. And of course, I take seriously Reinhold Niebuhr's notion that we should be aware always of the limitations of our own positions, as well as the possibility that the people we oppose are right every so often. And for me, as a Christian, I take seriously, again, the prophets. And while I'm not a prophet in the same way, perhaps, as Amos ended up in challenging the religious and political leaders directly, we have to say some things go against God's way. They go against the moral arc of the universe. I don't know as a Christian how I could support, even though I believe our borders are important, the separation of children from their parents. And I made it clear to anyone who would hear me that I thought that was immoral. I think that our justice system is often an injustice system toward people of color. And these days I'm learning more and more about how few years we have ahead of us to respond to climate change. These aren't just Christian positions, obviously. These are positions for the globe. These are positions for everyone and for 7 generations beyond us. And so for me, it is basically, as a Christian, to take seriously my citizenship, to vote, to crusade or support those positions that are important to me, that I believe are for the good of the planet and our nation, to also realize that we're in a pluralistic society where we may not always get what we want. I like the term of Whitehead that God's aim quite often is for the best for that particular impasse, which means we don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. We don't let the perfect get in the way of what we can concretely do in this moment of time. So I think we need to be looking to be heavenly minded, but also earthly good.
Okay, that's gets us an interesting setup for the next one. I'm going to combine a couple of things that I was going to ask, and that is dealing with the pastor. 2 things is, of course, how is the pastor to be involved in politics, but the real essence there that might distinguish this from what you've said so far, how do you pastor a congregation of diverse political views? And we can talk about separately about diverse religious, what diversity of doctrine, how that works in a congregation. But I'm asking about diverse political positions, especially strong views about particular candidates. How do you deal with that as a pastor?
And I think, again, each pastor will decide this on her or his or their own way. back to Amos. When Amos was accused of being a prophet, he said, well, I'm a shepherd and a dresser of vines. And I guess I would make the same excuse as Amos did, that I'm a theologian and a village preacher, village pastor. But I think that where I have been most active is to champion causes that are at the heart of what I believe the faith is. So in the course of my tenure as a pastor of this congregation that I'm in now, we decided to become open and affirming of the LGBT community. And I didn't charge ahead of it, but encouraged the folks who thought that was an important ethical issue to be the leaders of it. And when people ask me, well, why not just talk about all people and be open and affirming to all people and not just the LGBTQ community, I said, well, you know, they've been hurt enough by the church and we need to repent this. I've talked about Black Lives Mattering in our congregation and how, because of the 400 years of systemic racism in our country, we can't just say all lives matter, although all lives do matter, but we also have to remember where we've gone wrong. And as a pastor, I try to do it in a way that's persuasive, I hope, that's relational, that's not coercive and not domineering. I remember oftentimes pastors have to be, silent as well as vocal. And I remember the Sunday after Donald Trump was elected president, one of the saints of the church, he's now gone to heaven, one of the saints of the church said, I have a big smile on my face this week because of the election. And I think he knew where I stood on some of these issues. And I just kind of let it go because I was his pastor. And for him, I knew that the best thing I could do for him would be to be a good pastor. And so I accompanied him and his wife over the next couple of years as they dealt with their own declines. I think you have to pick those moments. When there was in light of the tragic deaths of African-American people at the hands of police, a group of our congregation decided that we needed to have a racial justice group. And I said, this is a great idea, and we went with that. Not everyone in the congregation is part of this. 10% of the active members are. The same for our environmental group. We're on Cape Cod, so we know the cost of climate change. And I've been lectured by church members about climate change, telling me I've been going the wrong way on this. And sometimes you just simply accept the criticism and go about your business trying to be faithful as you can be. There are times where we have to protest. I like the notion of protest and pray. That is, be prayerful, look for the goodness in everyone. But when there's something wrong, pick up the phone. When there's something wrong, support the candidate that you feel is important. When there's something wrong, support those who are out in the streets doing the right things, getting into some good trouble, as John Lewis says.
Getting into some good trouble. Now, there's a line to keep there.
I think so, Henry.
Well, let's get a little bit more specific about process theology. You've written a number of books in our Topical Line Drive series, in which the current volume is part of that series. And so a lot of people, I don't think, are that aware of what process theology is. If we could go in with a sentence or two and then say, what is it about process theology specifically that impacts both your politics, and if you have, can lead into also the way that you pastor, but also the way that you are part of a community? How does the process theology specifically feed into that?
Well, that's, again, a wonderful question, because in many ways, process thought has become a way of life for me. And that's been both a matter of intentionality as well as familiarity. I'll give a little autobiography. I first encountered process theology under the tutelage of Richard Keedy. It's always important to remember your teachers. When I was a sophomore at San Jose State University during the Vietnam War era. And for me, it helped me find a Christian way of looking at the world. It showed me that God wasn't far off, but that God was at the heart of our lives, that God cared about what was going on in my life and the world, that what I did mattered to God, that God feels both the pain and the joy of the world. Process theology inspired my sense that we're all connected, that we live in an interdependent universe. As Martin Luther King would say, that fabric of relatedness joins us all, or as the Bishop Tutu would say, Ubuntu, that I am because of you. And process thought focuses on that interdependence of life. It also focuses on what I would call the moral and spiritual arcs of history, taking up a bit from Theodore Parker, and those terms also used by President Obama and Martin Luther King. The moral and spiritual arcs of history, that God is involved in the world, that God is seeking to bring beauty into the world. You have a good new book out here by Patricia Adams Farmer, one of my dear friends, on beauty and process theology. I'd commend it to you all because it reminds us that beauty is at the heart of the reality that God wants to create beauty in the world, that the aim of the universe is toward beauty. And if that's true, we should aim at beautiful societies that nurture beautiful people. And for process theology also invites us to see politics not as coercive, not as domineering, but as relational, because God is relational. God doesn't determine everything. The future is open. There's room for us to be agents creating the future. And a God that is domineering nurtures domineering politicians. You can see it right now in some of the Christian pastors. They believe that their calling is to dominate society. They believe that their candidate is anointed by God. Process theology would take a very different view, that God is primarily relational, and we make changes through relationships that sometimes are hardball relationships, protest and pray, but also that we are not above others, but we are connected with others. And the last thing I'd suggest in the political realm for now is that process thought believes the future is open. It believes that we have the ability to be agents in companionship with God. I think it was Teresa of Avila who said, we are God's hands and feet. I think we're also God's heart. And we are God's hands and feet and heart. And that means that we have a role in changing the world, that the world is not going to get better without us. We are the ones we've been waiting for, as June Jordan says of the South African women protesting during apartheid. We are the ones we're waiting for. It's up to us right now to heal this moment, to be part of God's healing of the universe.
Okay, I'm leaving my own picture off of here for a second because I put up Beauty and Process Theology by Patricia Adams Farmer. That's the book that Bruce referred to earlier, because that relates very closely to what we've been talking about.
Well, Patricia is one of the great artistic theologians of our time. She is just as a wonderful theologian and a beautiful writer.
Note those are in the same series. And I would mention at this point the book Choosing Life by Jay McDaniel and John B. Cobb Jr., because it also ties into a number of things that you've said today and is available now.
And let me plug those books. I mean, Jay and John Cobb and Patricia Adams Farmer are at least a holy trinity for me. They're good friends. Jay and was my roommate in graduate school at Claremont in Southern California. Patricia's been a good friend for well over 30 years. And John Cobb, of course, is our teacher. Is one of the, now at 95 years old, is still writing, wrote a book for you, still writing, and is just the embodiment of process thought. So I'm honored that I had a small role in getting those books published. And I'm honored at how they have made such a difference in my life.
Okay.
Ubuntu, I am because of them.
Okay, let me carry on. We're running down on the time, but I'm not going to be real tight about the borders because I do want to ask you this last question and give you whatever time you want on it. What advice would you have for people who are considering their vote right now?
Well, that's an interesting one because I'm not an ideologue. And although I'm becoming more partisan personally in this time in which I think we have the clear choice of life and death in terms of the planet, in terms of climate change, I think the first advice I'd give to somebody is listen, listen, listen. Listen to a variety of sources. I myself listen to a variety of sources. I listen to the headline news on CNN and MSNBC, and I listen occasionally to the noon news on Fox News. I like NPR and PBS and British BBC because those are very balanced and don't have a political axe to grind. Listen to what the candidates actually say. Listen to their characters. Listen to how they treat people. Listen to their hearts, insofar as you can tell that, as well as their public actions. I think listening is key. I think that beyond that is to talk to people, if you can, of a variety of perspectives. And think deeply. Your vote does matter. We're in a democracy, and each vote does matter. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I take seriously the notion that from the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, that when a soul is saved, the world is saved. When a soul is destroyed, the world is destroyed. And being a process theologian, I take it even a little bit more micro than that. I say, when one moment is healed, the universe is healed. When there's one movement toward wholeness, the universe becomes whole. Your vote matters. The elections are sometimes decided by just a few votes. Your vote matters. I trust the system in the sense that if you feel as if your vote needs to be, you don't want to come to the polls, mail it in. It's safe, it's non-fraudulent, it's good. Go to the polls. We are citizens, and while our primary loyalty, or our ultimate loyalty, as Bob Cornwall says in one of his Energion books, is to God and not to Caesar or any president, take seriously your vote. The other reality is no candidate is going to be perfect. No candidate is going to be perfect. Again, I go back to Whitehead's notion of the best for that impasse, that God seeks the best for that impasse. Our politicians are going to disappoint us at times. We shouldn't put them on some of godlike anointed pedestal, but to see them as, hopefully, as humans trying to do the best they can, and look at the preponderance of a politician's positions, not just one, a preponderance of their positions, and say, does that align with my understanding of what the world needs? Does that align with my understanding of what will be best for the country? Or speaking as a Christian, does that align with my understanding of the teachings of Jesus, of the prophets, of the wisdom of the Sermon on the Mount? Does it build community? Is it civil? Does it nurture the earth? Does it see all people truly as equal and work for that? Does it expand rather than reduce democracy? Does it encourage rather than discourage dialogue? Those are the things I look for in this time as I seek to be a shalom voter, a voter who seeks God's realm on earth as it is in heaven.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining me today. Let everybody know, of course, they can look at this, view this on Facebook at any time. There'll also be a version published elsewhere on our website. for those who may not find it here on Facebook. Thank you, and we will be having some more Facebook Live events. We're trying to get to having one or more every week here at Energion. So Bruce, we wish you the best week possible there, and we'll talk to you again soon.
It's a joy.